Right, welcome to another episode of Retropower Uncut, and we're going to start this week's little roundup with the Mk2 Kaiser II. We've done various bits of work on that, starting with the handbrake actuator. It's got an electrically operated handbrake, same as the W108 Kaiser 1, just behind it. That requires bracketing into the bottom of the transmission tunnel, so that's been bracketed in. It picks up off the prop shaft centre bearing, plus an additional mounting ahead of that. And that's a linear motor, and it pulls on the normal handbrake cable mechanism, which is basically standard Jaguar. Obviously, this being, as you'll have already picked up on, this is on Jaguar axle assemblies, X300 axle assemblies. That pulls on the cable assembly that works with the X300 rear brake system. Also, James has been working on the bump stops. There's some chassis-mounted bump stops that limit the droop travel to a sensible level, because this car will go to a ridiculously low level. We're limiting the travel at a sensible level where it's safe, so that if there was a drastic failure within the air system, then no carnage will occur. Nothing's going to hit anything. I mean, the wheels will fully travel, but the car does end up pretty much on the ground without the bump stops, so we've done that as a bit of a safety measure. And Dean's been busy. Dean and George, in fact, have been busy sorting out panels. They've been doing some of the boot panel work, been foaming a number of panels, doing various trim work, which is starting to come together reasonably well now. Yeah, they've been busy on that. So that sort of rounds up more or less where we're at with the W111 at the moment. There'll be an ink with the Cortina gone now. That there'll be a lot more focus on this car. So things will be progressing reasonably quickly. And I can see James at the moment is working on the chrome work on the chromed parts for the front seat mechanisms for the car. They've been a bit of a nightmare. They were never designed by Mercedes to come apart. There are a lot of riveted parts in them. They're quite difficult to take apart. They have to be taken apart for chroming. They're now pretty much back together, but there's been quite a lot of headache involved with doing those. So that's been a bit of a trial, but it's getting back together now. I can see Adam's working on various bits to do with Utah as well, just while we're talking now. But they're not the most photogenic of parts. He's just rounding up lots of parts and preparing them for varying refurbishment or replacement. So okay, we'll move on to next door, I think, and go and have a look at what's been going on in there, because that's been the more major focus of attention this week. There's a few things progressing in here. The Morris has moved on quite a long way. We had fabricated a mock-up front wing before to check on wheel clearances. We were happy with wheel clearances. We've made the decisions on that, but we also concluded that we needed an alternative way. We needed to make something that was more of a book, if you like, and more of a shape assessment for the detail on the wheel arches. We got some conclusions on the major shape of them and how we were going to go about doing it. We've got various ideas on how we were going to go about doing it, and as I say, we worked out the clearances, but what we weren't sure about was the detail. Certainly, like the mid part of a wing, it's easy to determine like the overall shape of that section. What's hard is the way it blends into the surrounding panels, the shape here, the shape around a wheel arch. I mean, it's not perfect on here. This is just a foam mock-up, but getting the exact detail of an arch lip, you can't really do without actually making it out of something in the meantime. And the way the panels blend out into the surrounding panels, all of those things really need some sort of fairly detailed mock-up stroke book. So Cal's been working on basically knocking up this lot out of insulation board, foam, filler, various other materials to come up with a shape that I can then get profiles from to start making the actual steel panels. And we're pretty much there. We're very, very close. He's got to do a little bit more work on the back, but it's very, very close to being good enough now to get the profiles from for us to make the steel panels from. It doesn't need to be 100% there to be able to get the profiles from. It just needs to give us the rate of change of something like the arch lip going around and what its major shape is, say there. We can do stations with profiles, say there, and then we'll do another one there, and we'll do it radially around the wheel arch, all the way across the panel, do stations to get profile changes, and anywhere where there's a rapid change in profile or a fade out, we'll do sections tighter together. Then I can paper pattern the whole panel, and then when I start shaping the panel, I've got those station templates to use as references to see that I've got the actual shape correct. I can do the longitudinal shapes using sweep sections, which I was just sorting out the other day as well. We can use a longitudinal profile to make sure that the overall curvature is right, and anywhere where, as I say, where there's detail that we're not too, where it's quite difficult to get right, we can make closer sections, or even actually we even trial the panel over bits of this. That's certainly the way we're going to proceed. So we've done half the car like this. It means that then when we do the stations from this, we can mirror those to do the panels the other side of the car. So that gets us pretty close now to the actual shape of what we're going to be making. I'm actually now there's a couple of other things, but one of the key things is I'm actually waiting on another bit of kit. We need a more powerful piece of machinery for shrinking. So it's a problem we've had for a little while. We've worked around it for a long time, but decided we really need to bite the bullet and get a more powerful shrinker, because shaped like this, your choices are to do it all on the wheel and break the panel up into quite a number of pieces, or break it up into less pieces, do it in bigger sections, but then you need to do more shrinking, particularly on a section like this, where there's no way you can wheel all of the shape into that, because the material ends up very, very thin in the middle. So you do need to do shrinking around the outside, and there's a limit with the small foot-operated shrinkers, how much shrink you can apply around the edge of a shape like that. You just can't thicken the material enough to pull it in enough. So I'm waiting on a bit of kit for that. Scott, in the meantime, on the same car, has been busy on the inside. I guess there's not much point me trying to show you on the inside, but he's been busy panelling in the centre tunnel. He's finished off quite a lot of panel work on that. And lots and lots of finishing off metalwork on the inside. He's also done, we'd started last week, but he's now finished the seatbelt mounting reinforcers, because of where we've added these cars weren't equipped with seatbelts originally. We've added seatbelts in, but we didn't want to add visible structure into the car. The idea being it is a road car, it's not having a full roll cage in it, it's not having harnesses in it because they're a pain for road use. So we wanted to make some structurally safe seatbelt mountings that didn't add any glaringly ugly parts to the inside of the car. So he's made, well, I drew them up and cut the parts on the plasma, then Scott's made them and fitted them. Some reinforcers that go inside the quarter panels that pick up the shoulder mounting for the seat belts inside the top part of the quarter panel and add a lot of stiffness to the quarter, because the quarters on these cars are not very strong, and they can bend inwards and outwards relatively easy. Under crash forces, they'd be able to bend inwards quite a long way, which isn't something you'd want. So we've added a stiffener that basically prevents that happening, and also adds vertical stiffness to the panel and spreads the load into the rail under the rear window. So it adds a lot of strength into that area in the shell, and it ties the shoulder mounting of the seat belt down into the actual inertia reel mounting, which will be going onto the top of the sill structure. So it ties all that lot together really well. We're also on the final stages of just measuring up. I've got a rough drawing in CAD. We've just got to tie up the final dimensions for the fuel tank. Then that can go away to get made. Well, we'll get Concept Racing to make that. And we can also get a fuel filler, get that fitted, sorted out. We're also just planning various parts of the brake system. We've got the pedal box in, we've got to put the servos in. We're using remote servos on it, and we've just been working out where a little space for the remote servos, making sure that they're all going to fit in the space available. And Cal's also been working on the in-car entertainment system, which is sort of developing at the moment, and working out the details of the spec on that and ordering parts for that as well, so we can do the final fixings for those. And also finally the plumbing routing, which also ties into the braking system and the fuel system, working out the fuel pipe routings. putting in riv nuts. Well, we won't put the riv nuts in, but we'll put the holes in for the riv nuts, and weld studs in various places. We'll be putting spot welded studs in to carry fuel lines. So that's all developing as well. And the final part, Stu is now working. We've pinched Stu from the Mustang for a little bit because he's at a point where he's waiting for a couple of things on the Mustang. So we've pinched Stu. And he's doing the dash modifications in the Morris. The lower dash we're adding a section to the lower part of the dash, which is also going to form part of the centre console. All very in keeping with the style of the car. It's nothing garish and nothing too modern looking, but it's going to give us somewhere to mount extra things that we need to mount in the car. It's also going to give us somewhere to hide part of the heater behind. And also tied into that, Stu's also making the mountings for the HVAC unit because it's having heating and air conditioning. And one of my next jobs is then going to be to sort out the mountings for the aircon compressor and just finishing off a few other bits. I've got to finish the CAD for the engine to gearbox adapter because we've got to change. There's part of that that's got to be changed, so I've got to do that. And sort out the mountings for the aircon compressor. So yeah, lots of progress. We've had quite a few pairs of hands on this this week, and it's moved a long way. So yeah, it's imminently going to be on its wheels on the ground for a little trial. So that should be good. Yeah. Ah yes, Jamie's just reminded me from behind camera. One of the other things, which I should know because I've been doing it, we've been working on the boot hinges. One of the other stipulations by the car's owner, was that the hinges needed to be non-visible on the bonnet and the boot. I'm trying to it sounds easier than it actually is. The boot lid needs to open a long way on a Morris, as I've discovered trying to work this out yesterday, that because the car will be very low to the ground and the boot lid's already in quite a closed position when it's shut, it's very low when it's shut, it needs to open it needs to open an enormous way so you can actually see it into the boot. If you only open it sort of a typical sort of maybe 70 degrees or so, you still can't get into the boot. So it kind of needs to open sort of over 100 degrees, probably more. So my initial idea was to use a 4-link linkage, a scissor linkage for the hinges and mount them on the sides so that the boot lid would clear its aperture and open in a sensible fashion. But it's no good. I can't get enough opening with that geometry and have it clear everything it needs to clear. So we're now using a more conventional type of hinge mounted to the inside. But the problem, my initial reluctance to do that, was that the hinges were going to clash with the top of the fuel tank. Now, as it is, by the time I got the filler arrangement in, the top of the fuel tank's a little bit lower than I'd envisaged. And with a bit of head scratching and backwards and forwards yesterday, we've worked out that we can do a shaped hinge that will clear the seal gutter around the boot, and that I can mount to a reasonable piece of structure inside the boot that will actually give us the huge opening, almost vertical opening that we need on the boot lid. And not interfere with the fuel tank. So we've got a solution. I'm just in the midst of drawing it, but I've kind of swapped off that to move on conveniently to something we're going to touch on in a minute. But I think that rounds everything up for the Morris. There's quite a lot to remember on that, and I don't have a very good memory. So, but we'll move along. Past the Camaro again. Briefly pause on Mustang. Stu's been buttoning things up. Here's Stu walking through now. It's all right, after you, Stu. Stu's been buttoning things up on this. He's pretty much there now with what he can do with the car on the jig. He's remade the back edge of the rear roof support. He's fitted a new front roof support. He's trial fitted all of the front end panels as best he can with the parts he's got. The headlamp surrounds and the front wing sort of front cappings, they're all mangled from crash damage, as a lot of this car was, and they need to be replaced. However, he's picked up 90% of the fit of them from the undamaged parts of them, and we're happy with that now. And he's finish welded a lot of areas that were temporarily or tack welded just for checking alignment. So that's all done. There's various bits he's got to do underneath now which require it to come off the jig and onto the rotisserie, which I touched on last time, I seem to remember. Rotisserie is now on. We're just actually, strangely, waiting for a couple of bolts, a couple of UNC bolts that we didn't actually have in stock. We're waiting for those, and then that can come off and go on the rotisserie. So that's the next stage on that. But that's fallen in quite well with us needing Stu's skills on the Morris for the dashboard. So that's all worked out quite well. So next week, this will come off the jig onto a rotisserie where the Camaro is. Camaro will move, and then we can finish off the welding underneath that, and then that'll be ready to go in for blasting and zinc spraying. Well, moving on, you might notice something poking off behind the welding screen there, which is a car we built a couple of years ago. Time flies, so I lose track now of how long ago we did build it. It's a Chevette Rally Car. It's got a 298, I think, or 295 horsepower, 2.3 Vauxhall XE engine in it, Atlas axle, Quave sequential gearbox. It's a very, very rapid car. Its owner is a pretty handy driver as well, so it's been pretty successful. He's had a lot of fun rallying it. It's been pretty successful. He had an off in it last year. I lose track now of time. Totally lose track of time. Yeah, last year he had an off in it, smashed the front end up quite badly. We had it back, we repaired that, redid it, made another set of bodywork fiberglass panels for it. And I also redesigned the front suspension while we had it back then and made that sort of modular, so it's a bit more repairable, a bit easier to replace if it gets bent again. Two-piece lower wishbones and various things like that. The car's now back with us because he's not using it at the moment. It's had an engine rebuild. It's got a Paul Exon built XE in it. That's just been back to Paul for a rebuild. And while the car was apart, Alistair's decided, well, the owner, Alistair, has decided that he wants a rear anti-roll bar fitting, and he wants the front anti-roll bar changing to an adjustable blade adjustable setup where you have the twisty blades. Basically, you have those on each end of the tubular bar, and the anti-roll, the roll forces are transmitted to the bar via these blades. So when they're that way, i.e. the tall section of the bar vertical, they transmit nearly all of the suspension movement directly to the bar and nearly all of the force directly to the bar. When you turn them 90 degrees, they become much more bendy, for want of a better word, and transmit a lot less. So the roll stiffness is reduced when the bar's like that, increased when the bar's like that. And that's a case of locking off an adjuster, or unlocking an adjuster, turning the bar, relocking off the adjuster. So they're quite quick to adjust. So at the moment, the job I've just switched on to is making the brackets for the body to carry the bar. The bar sits in some little aluminium blocks on some brackets on the body. That's the piece of tube that will form the bar. That sits on some brackets in some brackets under the body, sort of something like very approximately there on the back. So I've got to fabricate the brackets on the car there and there-ish for that. And then I've got to make some carriers that go on the axle, and that's what I'm scratching my head on at the minute. I think we've pretty much got a solution, but it's quite tricky because we don't really want, or we didn't want, to have to weld to the axle. The axle's zinc metal sprayed as usual with everything we do and powder coated. It's not a good thing to start having to strip it off. It's quite a pain. However, we are going to have to weld to it. There's no way I can get around that, but there's a patch I can grind off to weld, which isn't really going to cause any other damage or any other knock-on issues for repainting. We can just repaint a localized area. So I'm going to do that on each side of these lower arm carriers, and then fabricate a carrier for the drop link that packages the drop link basically in this area here, each side. I think we can fit it all in. It's quite tight. As usual with everything I do, and I've mentioned before, I do the difficult bit first. The rear end's the difficult bit because there's not a lot of space and not a lot of height to get all the components in, and by the time you account for axle roll and articulation of everything, it's all quite tight under there. But that will all work. The front, it already had an anti-roll bar on it, but it wasn't adjustable. And he wants an adjustable setup on that so that we can stiffen the front up for dry conditions, but soften it off when it's wet to reduce the understeer. The problem he was having previously was that the car was either understeery in the wet or very rolly in the dry. There wasn't a lot of, there was no real middle ground. So with this setup, the hope is we can improve that a little bit and get the turn in a bit better, and limit the roll a little bit, because it's rolling off. Whatever you do with geometry, it was rolling the edges off the tyres. So we're hoping that we can make some improvements there. There's a few other bits and bobs, little tweaks being done to it. It's amazing what cracks on a car. It cracked an alternator mount, standard cast aluminium part. All bolts still tight, nothing else wrong, but it's broken in half with vibration. That's one thing, and there's a little bit of a crack in an exhaust that needs repairing. Again, just purely down to vibration and impact damage. So nothing too untoward. Later on, it'll probably be next year, I think now, but the car's also at some stage going to be having a paddle shift system fitted as well, because the existing ECU is capable of running that. All the sort of the electronics are there to run it. The car's running a full suite of life racing electronics, so it's capable of handling all that. It just needs the hardware in place to do it. It needs some modification to the transmission tunnel so that the actuator can fit onto the gearbox, and a few other things, steering wheel modifications for the paddles and the like. But that's a job that's not being done this time round. The main thing this time is anti-roll bars plus maintenance-y type jobs. That pretty much rounds that one up. And then the other major thing is Utah, which is currently residing in the paint booth. I'm going to grab my coffee so I can hold it again. Yeah, Utah is currently in the paint booth, and finally we've got a significant change to look at with Utah, in that Gaz has literally just finished Raptoring it. It's literally just before we walked back in, I heard the booth stop. Gaz has just finished Raptoring it, and now the underside is painted in its final coat of body-coloured Raptor with lacquer over it, which is what we do. Our undercoating system is basically reblast the metalwork, zinc metal spray, epoxy prime, body-coloured Raptor, and then lacquer with seam sealer, etc. as well. But that's the basic sequence, and it's just got to the stage of being body-coloured Raptor and lacquer underneath, and then black Raptor on the inside. We tend to use Raptor on the inside as well because it's tough. It's easy it withstands damage really well. Where it's all going to be hidden by trim, we use it. It deadens sound quite nicely. It's waterproof. It does everything you'd want of a paint, only it's thicker than a paint and heavier duty than a paint. So we use that on the inside as well. So the inside's now done in black Raptor. The outside, the underside is now done in body colour Raptor and lacquer, and it's looking really good. So yeah, I think that pretty much wraps it up for another week at Retropower.